With us right now to give us his preview is Phil Steele, who you can follow on Twitter at PhilSteele042. And, of course, the Phil Steele College Football Annual, the Bible for so many of you as we get ready for the upcoming season. Good to have you back in El Paso. Phil, how are you?
Hey, I am doing great, Steve, and you picked a great day to have me on because today is the day where the magazine officially hits the newsstands. So it'll be out there at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Walmart, Walgreens, Target, CVS, Publix, places like that. And the main thing I have to say to anybody listening, make sure you head out there today and get it because they sell out so quick once they hit the newsstands.
Is it pretty amazing when you look back on this and realize that the amount of demand that the College Football Annual has kind of morphed into over the years?
Absolutely. And it's sort of two-pronged, Steve. Because you go back to 23 years ago when the first magazine hit, nobody really knew about it. It was black and white newsprint, and it was 188 pages as opposed to the 352-page monster that it is nowadays. But the other thing was, back then, 23 years ago, college football was not where it is right now. College football was maybe the fourth or fifth most popular sport, whereas today, I feel college football is number 2 next to the NFL, above baseball, above the NBA. College football is the number 2 sport in the country, so that's a plus. The other plus is once somebody gets a hand on one of my magazines and gets it in there and starts using it for the season, they need to have it each and every year, and that's why the demand's so high.
I can imagine for somebody like yourself, the amount of time that must go into this has got to be a year-round thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're started already on next year's magazine. I have a staff of about 15 people that work for me, and we work on nothing but football year-round. To be honest, we completely get rolling on it the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So from the Sunday after Thanksgiving all the way through June 1st, a little over 6 full months, we're working on nothing but the College Football Magazine, and that's how we're able to put so much information, so much detail into it.
Phil, I think what's also exciting is that for a lot of our listeners, especially those that regularly visit ESPN.com throughout the day, they're going to be getting a chance to see a lot more of you online in terms of your content during the football season.
Yeah, it's a big plus. Just got a 3-year deal with ESPN. We're going to be doing a lot more, so it's going to be a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed my trips to Bristol. We're making more of them now. And putting a lot of content up on ESPN.com. And ESPN Insider, of course, is such a great deal because, it's just like $3 a month, and you get to read all of the ESPN articles that are up there. So make sure you go to ESPN.com and find out more about how to become an ESPN Insider because $3 a month, you can't beat that, Steve.
No doubt. Phil Steele on our Village Inn hotline as we continue on Sports Talk. So last year, I brought you on, and the exciting thing about last year was you were really high on UTEP. You had them as one of your most improved teams in college football. You were expecting big things from them, like a lot of us here locally, and unfortunately, the season didn't work out the way we all had thought. They were 4-8, and you even mentioned in your preview this year that you don't find many teams that actually see their record drop from one year to the next when you've got them listed as your most improved.
Yeah, I've had teams before. I think if I put out, let's say, 16 most improved teams, generally 12 to 13 of them will have a much improved record the next year, and there will be 2 or 3 that maybe have about the same record. But for UTEP last year, one of the rare teams that actually made my most improved list went from 5-7 to 4-8. One of the things I liked last year is they avoided all the big boys out of the other division, the East. And I thought when you looked at the talent, when you looked at a guy like Aaron Jones in the backfield, that they were going to have a dynamic run game, which, Jones ran for 1,773 yards last year, but an extremely disappointing year for me, and I'm sure for Coach Kugler as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Then again, a lot of us didn't expect Army to have the kind of season they had, especially coming the year before where they were one of the worst teams in college football, which I guess is really the hardest thing to predict is when you have a down year and then you can turn things around like they did the following year, you don't always know for sure how big that turnaround's going to be.
And a lot of times, too, Steve, it's that early season confidence that a team gains. If, you start the year and you get a couple of wins, maybe a win or two that you didn't think you were going to get at the start of the year, the team starts to go on the field thinking they're going to win, then knowing they're going to win, and that confidence level plays huge at the end of the year. And I think we saw that a little bit in the UTEP games last year. You go down the stretch, games against Florida Atlantic, Rice, at the end of the year. Disappointing losses on the road, games that, the Florida Atlantic game could have gone either way, but I think had UTEP at that point been a 6-4 team going into those games, they might have gone on the field, maybe won those games. So confidence is a big factor in college football.
Phil, before we talk about the conference itself for UTEP this upcoming season, the first thing that you note right off the bat is 3 of their 4 non-conference games are on the road. They've got to go at Army this year. They open up at Oklahoma. Their only non-conference home game is against Arizona, and then the annual Battle of I-10 at New Mexico State. Best case scenario, if things really work out to UTEP's favor this season, are we looking at 2-2 in the non-conference?
Yeah, I think the best case scenario would be 2-2. Don't see any way that they steal the Oklahoma game. I think the Army game is going to be extremely tough as well because you look at when the game is played. Now, if you're playing an option offense like Army, you usually want to have a week prior to prepare for it, a little bit extra time. They're going to go from the pass-happy New Mexico State offense, pass-happy Arizona offense, and I think Oklahoma is going to throw the football more this year as well as Rice. So it's really a change-up in gears completely to prepare for the option, traveling across the country. That makes that Army game an extremely difficult situation.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think you're right on. But if there's one advantage for the Miners, they faced Army last year, and they were annihilated by Army at home last year. So at least you have film from a year ago, and Army doesn't seem like the kind of team that's going to suddenly overhaul and give you different looks from year to year.
Well, they are not, and that is a plus. If you haven't faced the option before, it's always a little bit more difficult the first time you face the option. And I'll also point out that last year when that game was played, Army had just lost a defensive back who had died, and they played with an extra level of emotion in that game. So that was a game where you thought going in that UTEP might be in a little bit of trouble due to that extra added emotion. But the one thing Army does have going for them this year, besides the home field edge, is the fact they're an experienced team. This is an Army team that generally service academies are going to return between, let's say, 8 to 12 starters. They've got 16 returning starters this year. In fact, they only lose 16 lettermen, a ridiculously low number. Service academies are known to give seniors a lot of playing time. They only lose 16 lettermen. They've got 57 coming back this year. So that is a veteran Army team they're taking on.
The first week of the season, they're in Norman against Oklahoma. If Bob Stoops was coaching, I would say that UTEP has 0 chance. Now, there was a coaching change. It's going to be the first game of his career as a new head coach of the Sooners. Does this play into UTEP's hands in any way, knowing that sometimes in week 1, it's when the really good teams need to get the kinks out a little bit?
Not this year, and here's the reason why. You go to where Oklahoma was, and generally when you have a first-year head coach, Steve, the first-year head coach has to learn the players' strengths and weaknesses. The players have to learn the new schemes, both offensively and defensively, and that's where you are susceptible. But here, Bob Stoops took the team through the spring, so it was status quo all spring long. Bob Stoops had the post-spring interviews. The summer work had begun, and their offensive coordinator is back in Lincoln Riley. It's his 3rd year there. He knows the players inside and out. Mike Stoops is back as the defense coordinator. He's been there forever, knows the players inside and out. They've got a pretty talented team. In fact, my number 1 rated offensive line in the country, Baker Mayfield, is back. And I think it might even add a little special to it, and in fact that it's Lincoln Riley's first ever game as a head coach. So they might actually put a little extra into it as opposed to maybe a Bob Stoops as the head man saying, oh, well, it's just UTEP. We got some bigger games on deck. So I can't say that UTEP really has much of a chance against Oklahoma. That is a loaded team this year.
13 days later, they get Arizona at home on a Friday night. Rich Rodriguez, one of the most disappointing teams in the country last year. How will Arizona be in your forecast this season?
I've got Arizona last in the South, so that's a game that UTEP could potentially steal. The fact it's on a Friday night is a nice advantage to have. Now, Arizona last year did go through a myriad of injuries on the on the offensive backfield. They were down to 3-4 quarterbacks. They had to move wide receivers to running back. They were so banged up. If they can keep Nick Wilson healthy, if they get good quarterback play out of a Brandon Dawkins or maybe even a Khalil Tate, then they'll be an improved team this year. But I don't think they're going to be that much of an improved team. So that's one game where early in the season, on a Friday, they're catching Arizona off a play in Houston. I think if UTEP gets up to that level quickly, and I like UTEP's offensive line this year, I think that they would have a shot at that game.
New Mexico State will be the following week, Saturday in Cruces. The Miners have owned New Mexico State over the last 4 or 5 years in this battle of I-10. And we kind of wonder, will the Aggies ever be able to get on a similar type of roll against the Miners? How do you forecast New Mexico State?
Well, it's a dangerous New Mexico State team this year. I picked them higher in the Sun Belt Conference than everybody else. They've got Tyler Rogers back at QB. Unlike UTEP, which loses its star running back, they've got Larry Rose back. And Larry Rose, of course, has missed the last couple of games. I think Rose will play in the game against UTEP. And really one of the big things that I found when I was talking to Coach Martin about the New Mexico State team this year is the JUCO infusion that they have on the defensive side of the ball. They have added a lot of talent defensively this year, so much so that last year's number 2 tackler and leading returning tackler, Dalton Harrington, probably going to be third string this year. That tells you about the talent they've added at linebacker. So as poor as New Mexico State's defense has been, and we're talking about 40-plus points per game over the last 5 years combined, I think they'll have a little bite on the defense, and they will have a dangerous offense. I think that's going to be one of the better rivalry games that the two teams have had.
Phil Steele talking college football here on the show. Now, Phil, looking at the Miners and Conference USA, you've got UTEP pegged 6th this year out of 7 teams in the West. I like it because essentially if the Miners have a good season, they surprise, as opposed to last year where you kind of thought the Miners would be the breakout team and they disappointed. So really for UTEP and their team in conference play, the only way to go is up.
Yeah, that is correct. And a lot of times teams do better when they're underneath the radar and they've got that extra chip on their shoulder. That's why so many underdogs pull upsets during the course of the year. And UTEP will definitely have that factor going in their favor this season.
Now, you love their offensive line. You've got them ranked number 1 in Conference USA again this year. And knowing they have plenty of their starters back, it will be a big strength. I wonder, with Ryan Metz now at the quarterback spot, firmly locked in as the starter, and losing Aaron Jones, if perhaps Josh Fields tries to take reins of the running back position as the true freshman like Jones did years ago when he burst onto the scene, if maybe the Miners will at least be able to have that quality quarterback and running game, the bigger question will be the receiving core.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you 100% there. I think that Josh Fields can step in, do well. And let's face it, last year UTEP's offense was much better when Ryan Metz was at quarterback than when he was not. You know, you go back to that disappointing game against Florida International at home. I thought it set up well, but Metz missed the game with injury, and Florida International, playing its first game under an interim head coach, came in and beat them 35-21. With Metz at QB, they were much stronger. They've got a good offensive line in front of them. So if they can get the receiving core coming around, and if Josh Fields establishes himself as a solid running back, he's not going to match Aaron Jones. I mean, 1,773 yards, 7.7 yards per carry. It's not going to happen. I don't care what offensive line you're running behind. But Fields could step in this year as a true frosh and surprise a lot of folks. As
far as defensively, I worry about the defensive line a little bit. I want to see some pressure on opposing, offensive quarterbacks and really try to get some sacks. I love them at the linebacker core. I think that if you're going to look at a strength for the Miners defensively this year, it'll be linebacker.
Yeah, and I agree with that. They return their number 1, their number 2, their number 9, their number 15 tacklers, including a second-team CUSA will linebacker and Alvin Jones, who I'm very high on. And they also bring in 2 JUCOs. They move over Trayvon Hughes from running back, so this unit looks extremely strong. And up front, they lose some key guys from last year, but they've got 6 of the top 9 guys back on the defensive line. Teamed with the linebacking core, you got to think they're going to be tougher against the run this year. And then you go to the secondary. They return 3 multi-year starters in the secondary. It should make a climb in the pass defense rating, so it's got to be an improved defense this year. I thought last year's defense would improve, though, to be honest with you, Steve, and they went from allowing 32.9 to 34.9, but they have to improve this year with 7 starters back.
I always wonder when it's coaching changes, and they went through, Sean Kugler had a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator last season, and something he talked a lot about during the year is it just takes a little time, especially when you overhaul both of the types of offensive and defensive situations we've seen. You can't just have sometimes seamless transitions from one to the next.
That's very true. And as I mentioned, if it's like a first-time head coach coming in, They have to learn the players' strengths and weaknesses. Players have to learn the new schemes, and there was definitely changes on both sides of the ball last year, and took a little time to adjust. Once again, you go back and you look at some of those games last year. Maybe if they beat Florida International, then maybe later in the year they beat a Florida Atlantic and get to that bowl eligibility spot. Sometimes confidence has a lot to do with it, and so hopefully UTEP can get off and pull a couple upsets early this year.
As far as the rest of the league, I like Rice early on. Phil, I think that that's a winnable game, although last season Rice really surprised UTEP and hung 44 on them when we didn't expect it. The thing that I'm interested in is going to be November, when the Miners have to finish conference play 3 out of 4 games on the road. The only team they get at home is Louisiana Tech. Otherwise, it's Middle Tennessee, North Texas, and UAB to wrap things up.
Yeah, last time Louisiana Tech traveled to UTEP, that was a close game, 17-15 final score. Could have gone either way. Just got off the phone today with Coach Stockstill, going over that Middle Tennessee game. Keep in mind, Middle Tennessee's off a bye and at home, and they're very capable across the board. In fact, the only question marks you have with them, who's going to be the feature running back, and the inexperience on the defensive line, but they look solid throughout. That's going to be a tough out for UTEP there. North Texas, I think, falls into the winnable category. Even though North Texas is off a bowl game last year, keep in mind they were just a 5-8 team. They only made a bowl because of the academic things. So I think that one's winnable, and clearly UTEP or UAB a winnable game at the end of the year. A lot of folks are recommending when UTEP went away that they would take a year or two, maybe at the FCS level, to build themselves back up. So I think that game is clearly on the winnable side.
You really like UTSA this year. The Roadrunners are one of your top teams in the West.
Yeah, they are. And, when you look at UTSA last year, we talked earlier about the confidence level. They're a team that gained confidence as the season went on. They won 3 of their last 5 games, with their only losses being at Louisiana Tech, at Texas A&M. They've got 14 returning starters this year, so they're more experienced. They've got a veteran quarterback in Dalton Sturm. And Dalton Sturm's never going to be an NFL prospect or even one of the top quarterbacks in the league. But he's a good leader at the quarterback position. Defensively, they've got 7 starters back this year. And then when you line up UTSA and their schedule, which I rate number 127 in the country, I think that this is a team capable of easily topping last year's 6-win total. So I think they may be Louisiana Tech's biggest challenger in the West.
Phil Steele on our Village Inn hotline as we continue on Sports Talk. Follow him on Twitter at PhilSteele042. You can go to PhilSteele.com. A lot of his work is going to be coming to the ESPN.com Insider series, and the magazine comes out today. So a lot of great reasons to be a part of the show with Phil and the magazine. I want to go top 20, and you tell me, is it the usual suspects we're going to see this year in your top 20, or are there some teams that could be making an appearance that might be flying under the radar a little bit, Phil?
Yeah, actually, this year, Steve, it does look like it's going to be most of the usual suspects. And when I say that, I'm talking about the big names. Now, USC hasn't been a team that's been there recently. They were there 3 years ago, but they're finally up to speed, and they're definitely in my play to make the playoffs this year. Sam Darnold's there. They won their final 9 games last year, and I don't think anybody in the country wanted to play USC at the end of the year. Other teams that I have making the playoffs this year, the Ohio State Buckeyes, which last year had just 6 returning starters. This year, Ohio State has got 17 returning starters. They also had Kevin Wilson in as the offensive coordinator. And keep in mind, Kevin Wilson did great things at Indiana with less talent to work with. So I think they're a team that, when you look at the talent and the schedule, they'll be favored in every game, as will USC, as will, not going out of the box here, Steve, Alabama. Yeah, they're loaded once again. They've got the defense ranks in my top 6 in all 3 units. They have my number 2 rated offensive line, number 5 receivers, best set of running backs in the country, and a veteran quarterback. They'll be favored in all their games. Then the 4th team I threw in there was Florida State. When you look at Florida State, they're a team who, when I was talking to Coach Jimbo Fisher last year over the summer, we're going over the team, every time we'd wrap up a position, he'd say, boy, are we going to be good next year. Well, next year's here for that Florida State team. The only thing I don't like about them is their schedule. They do open up with Alabama in a neutral game. They have to play Clemson on the road, and they also play an up-and-coming Florida on the road. I think Florida is going to be one of the dark horse surprise teams this year, a non-top 10 team that can contend for a playoff berth. So a tough schedule, But I think those are the four that make the playoffs.
How about in Texas? We've got Tom Herman now coaching the Longhorns in his first season, A&M in the SEC, and Tech, and some of the other schools like Baylor. How do you have some of the the Power 5 Texas schools ranked?
I would put Texas right at the top. When you look at Texas, I think Tom Herman steps into a great situation because they basically underachieved last year, especially when you look at them on the defensive line and secondary. Way too much talent there to put up the kind of numbers they did defensively. They have a veteran offense. And here's the thing. When Tom Herman was at Houston, they faced 6 ranked teams. They went 6-0, despite being a Group of 5 team. So I think Texas would be at the top. A&M, someone's under pressure. I think they'll do well, but they are playing in the SEC. I only have them middle of the road in their division, which is the ever-tough SEC West. Houston, I think, has got a chance of, in fact, I projected them to play in the AAC championship game this year. So I'm looking for big things out of them. And TCU is a team to keep your eyes on as well. The last time they made both my most improved list and my surprise team list, they almost made the playoffs. They were number 5 in the country that year. Well, this year they make my most improved list. They make my surprise team list. Never shortchange Gary Patterson. That guy gets it done.
Phil, I enjoyed the time. You're the best in the business. I'll look forward to continuing our conversations on through the college football season. And thanks for giving us a little taste of your preview magazine, which is out today on newsstands.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Always great talking football with you. And just a reminder once again, make sure you get out there and get that magazine today because it sells out so quick.